In step 1 of the 4-step processes, the basics of critical thinking and dialectical discourse are taught through explicit instruction of declarative knowledge regarding the principles of argument and the lexical features that form argument. The explicit instruction in this course design is presented outside of class via podcast in order to exploit all the advantages of a blended learning approach and of mobile learning. Critical thinking instruction may be divided into 2 categories: explicit instruction in the components of argument and the critical dispositions or attitudes. The podcast is essentially a 9-episode limited-run series and covers 6 main subjects using a 2-part structure. Each of the podcasts focuses on a specific building block of argumentative organization. The introductory episode briefly discusses critical thinking in terms of critical dispositions and as a mental discipline based in the careful use of specific words and the organization of ideas. Episodes 2 and 3 focus on the basics of argument. They discuss the underlying syllogistic structure of arguments, explaining the difference between reasons and conclusions. They present the basic idea of an argument as a conclusion based on 2 or more premises. Episode 3 discusses the 2 organizational patterns of argument: conclusion first and conclusion last arguments. It is explained that, in order to understand argument, it is important to know whether one is reading a premise or a conclusion, and that for second language learners it is not always easy to distinguish one from the other. Episode 3, therefore, explains how to do this by instructing the listener in commonly used premise indicators like and conclusion indicators like. Episodes 4 and 5 repeat the 2-part pattern with the underlying structure of a major and minor premise argument discussed in Episode 4 and the relevant lexical items presented in Episode 5. In Episode 6, hidden premises are briefly discussed as being based on widely held assumptions. It is also noted that some of these assumptions may be false and even based on prejudice. The remainder of this episode focuses mainly on hypothetical premises and variations on the conditional if X then Y structure. Episode 7 is a summing up of episodes 2 through 6. Its discussion of validity and soundness challenges learners to apply argumentative principles and indicator word comprehension to assess the validity and soundness of several short sample arguments. The podcast series ends at episodes 8 and 9 with a description of the 3 categories of argument: descriptive, normative, and prescriptive arguments, and the indicator words specific to each. It should be noted that while some social and global issues are mentioned in episodes 8 and 9, they are issues that most students are already familiar with, and their treatment in general is expressed in 1 or 2 sentences. It is for the teacher to aid in the transfer of the declarative knowledge taught in the podcast series to a more in-depth treatment of issues presented in the class via textbook. The next video discusses how, in Step 2, declarative knowledge learned through explicit instruction from the podcast is then scaffolded into procedural knowledge through pair work involving online text reconstruction exercises.